Assalamu alaikum and good evening. My name is Yusuf Ismail and the program you're watching is I Beg to Differ. This program focuses on interactive debate on socio-economic, political, cultural and religious issues affecting us, and certainly looking at some of the global dominant trends in the international community. Today we look and discuss the ongoing persecution and tragic plight of the Riffain people under the monarchical dictatorship of King Mohammed VI. But who exactly are the Riffain people? Where do they come from? What do they stand for? And what indeed are the origins of this particular group? Well, joining us to discuss the ongoing persecution and plight of the Riffain people, we will be joined by a guest from Germany via Skype, speaking from an undisclosed location as she is presently in exile, to tell us more about the ongoing persecution, torture and incarceration of this community in Morocco. Welcome, Sister Najat, and it's good to have you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today here, speaking to you about the Rif cause and the Riffian people.
Well, let me just start off with this, Sister Najat, because a lot of people don't know about this. Who or what are the Riffain people?
Yeah. Well, the Riffian people in the indigenous language, which is Tarifid, are called Irifian. They are also known as Rif, Riafa, Ruafa. They are the indigenous Amazigh people of North Africa, of Northwest Africa. These are the Riffians, the original indigenous people who have been there for thousands of recorded years. And we derive the name Rif from the Rif mountain, which is being part of the Gibraltar Arc.
So in terms of linguistically, ethnically speaking, culturally, religiously, even from a linguistic or language point of view, would the Rif people then would they be different from Moroccans? Because, you know, if you look at society in general, if you look at society, even in South Africa, the South African context, people originally are indigenous to a particular land, but through decades and centuries of intermarrying, interbreeding, there's a kind of a mixture of, you know, you could say cultural assimilation across the board. Now, looking at you, you look very much Moroccan. Is there a particular distinct element between the Riffain and the Moroccans in terms of making a distinguishing between the two?
Oh yeah, I mean, there is a distinct difference. First of all, it's the language. So the Riffians, they speak their own Berber ancient language. It's been considered to be one of the oldest languages of the world. While most of the Moroccans, they speak Darija, which is like an Arabized Berbian mixture. There are other Berbers in Morocco, but they also speak different languages which you can't really understand, so they can't understand each other. Yes, there is some mixture which happened by assimilation policies of the regime, in particular, to basically mix up the folks for them to create a new nation.
So would you see yourself then as African? Would you see yourself as African, part of the African continent? I mean, if you were here prior to certainly the Arab conquest, the spread of Islam, and the spread of Arabic culture, you were very much indigenous to the Moroccan land. Are you saying the Moroccans, the conventional Moroccans that you see there, are descendants of Arabs that had settled in Morocco?
I'm not quite sure if I heard your question well, because there is a tone issue. But what I understood, let me repeat what I understood. Whether we consider ourselves Africans, absolutely. We are the indigenous people of the Northwest African soil, right? So yes, we consider ourselves Africans. But actually, what you see today as Morocco, and I think that was the second part of your question, never existed before 56. So Morocco today is an invention of the French colonists, right? So if you look at the Rif before 56, it was never under Moroccan Sultan rule. And actually, even the Sultan back then, they divided they considered the land that they have been ruling as Blad al-Makhzen, and the rest was Blad Siba. So Rif was always autonomous and independent. So that's why we could always keep our heritage in language and culture and traditions, even though most of the Rifians might be considered to be Muslims, but they still celebrating and inherited a lot of their pre-Islamic traditions and and rituals.
So the point I want to establish now is that, having seen this particular group, I mean, certainly you are a minority as somewhat independent. Have the Rifain, are they looking now for the creation of an autonomous state in Morocco or separate to Morocco?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is first of all, what you need to understand from the Rifians, they always have been an autonomous and independent folk. Even before there was a Rif Republic established between 1921 and 1927, there was like an independent republic based on democracy established. Actually, it was the first established on African soil. But even before that, the Rifians always had a big autonomy and independence throughout history. They even always had, their own kingdoms, like the Kingdom of Nkor, and they were like self-governing. They have their own tribal governance structures with elected spokesmen, and they always used to have their own code of rule and within their own system of clans. So allowing them to regulate justice and social order without the presence of a central institution. And this is part of, I would say, of the Rifian DNA. So basically, this Rif Republic that has been there actually was created after the Rifians revolted against the Spanish colony. And when they won, they declared independence, but not only to the Spanish colonists, but also to the Moroccan Sultan, as well as their French allies. And they could only basically defeat the Rifian and take their Rif Republic by using, by conducting actually war crimes.
I just saw a slide basically produced by one of your colleagues. The quotation is in the book Making Morocco, Colonial Intervention and the Politics of Identity by Jonathan Whitson. I'm not so sure if you contributed to the slide, which obviously deals with the point that it didn't exist before 1956. The Sultan only governed a few cities that were called Bled, Makhzen, Rif. So the point basically is that what you see as Morocco, as what you see in many other countries in Africa, very much a byproduct of colonial occupation, the process of balkanization that basically happened. But prior to that period, there seems to be an indication that there was also oppression, there was also persecution. Was there persecution, for example, by the Ottomans towards the Rifain, or by, certainly as you mentioned, the Sultans, but during the Ottoman Empire, were the Rifain subjected to persecution?
Well, I mean, did you say the Ottoman Empire?
Under the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans, if you could get me clear, the period when the Ottomans basically controlled large swathes of Africa, parts of Spain, at that point in time, were the Rifain subjected to persecution?
Well, actually, the Ottoman Empire actually never made it to our land because of the Rifians. We Rifians, and especially there was a tribe the Beni or Aids Nassan, they are the ones that fought back the Ottomans. So they never came to our land. So here you can see, I mean, throughout history, all the recorded wars that the Rifians had was actually to establish, first of all, to defend themselves and to keep their self-governance and independence from any foreign power.
Do you see? I just saw this. Is it true that the first independent republic on African soil was established in the Rif?
Yes.
And colonial powers had this kind of fear. I never knew about this. The colonial powers had the fear that that could be a role model for subsequent states and subsequent revolts that would essentially happen in that particular time period. What then subsequently happened after that?
So basically, I mean, yes, it's true that that was like the first republic that has been established. The Rif Republic of the Rifians was the first republic based on democracy on African soil. That is true. But as you said, and you said it quite right, the Spanish and the French colonists, they didn't and they couldn't allow this to happen. So it was like only there for a few years. So they joined the forces and actually conducted a genocide, them together also with the Moroccan Sultan against the Rifians. So they used mustard gas. That was also like the first recorded war in history, in worldwide history, by using mustard gas, bombarding the civilians with airplanes, which we today we still suffer from, from all the impacts of these chemical weapons, which back then were like forbidden, right?
Okay. I'm going to come to some of the crimes, and I also want to, obviously, I'm going to zero in onto what the Moroccan government has done. I may suggest that we did attempt to get representatives of the Moroccan embassy in South Africa, but they did not turn up, nor did they have the courtesy of, in fact, basically replying to our request for this discussion. But be that as it may, I just want to, before we unpack the war crimes and the genocide and the mass murders that have taken place, which many people are not aware of, we obviously are discussing the issue of the politics of identity. Now, the point I want to establish from you is this, is that we are living in a multicultural society. Would you see yourself, I mean, and we come from different shades, different race groups, different backgrounds. Do the Rifane people not see themselves inherently as part and parcel of the global ummah, in terms of which they could possibly turn to when it comes to inherent persecution, torture, incarceration, mass exodus or mass disappearances by certain activists? Don't they basically appeal to that kind of commonality, I mean, by many Muslim groups that may probably want to take up your cause?
I didn't hear quite well the last part of your question. I mean, apparently, as you see, the Rifanians today, they basically exactly suffer from mass persecution, from racism, from an apartheid policy, just because of their identity. And it's beautiful and wonderful to live in a multicultural environment, but to be living in a multicultural environment, that means you still can be who you are, right? You can still speak your language, you can still have your own religion, you don't have to assimilate or to become someone else to be accepted. And so what we see today is basically they want you to become someone else who you are not, in some ways to be accepted. And even that we see today, right? I mean, there is a big Arabization policy going on, and also like all the historical books have been rewritten to erase basically anything that goes back to this Rifian identity, right? So they by force want to keep people not knowing who they are, where they're from, so for them not to even ask for that. So that's what we see today. So whoever asks for rights, even like for basic rights, right? And we're not saying we are Rifians and that's why we want to have more than others, but we want just to have at least what we are entitled to, which is our land, our language, our history, and also like maybe also like to self-govern ourselves, to have also like, why not our own autonomy? And I think that's a valid request. And I think like if a government or a regime can't stand that, how weak is that regime, right? So if they have to prosecute everyone who wants their rights, that for me is a sign of weakness for this so-called nation, for this so-called government, for this so-called regime, right? Because if they are confident enough, they would allow people to have their rights, because they know the people, will be still part of the system, because, everyone is the same. But apparently they know exactly not everyone is the same, right? And especially the RIF since '56 have been militarized. There has been an apartheid policy going on. They have been heavily marginalized. There are no schools, no hospitals, almost no infrastructure, and the highest unemployment rate, people suffering from cancer. Actually, the highest cancer rate in the whole entire country comes from these reef regions or areas that have been bombarded with napalm bombs by the Moroccan monarchy, and bombarded by the mustard gas by the colonists along with the sultan, with the Moroccan sultan, right? So all of that. So today, if you suffer from cancer, you can't get treatment in the RIF. There is nothing. There is no RIF cancer treatment hospitals, right? Even though if you go to the Moroccan regime's website, they are advertising it, but in reality there is none. So that means for you as a poor person, right, heavily marginalized, no infrastructure, no income, nothing, you would have to travel up to 10 hours all the way to Rabat or Casablanca to get a treatment. So this is basically, this is a policy to have the people die, right? So they can, so what's happening in the RIF today is either those people are dying, jailed, or expelled to Europe, right? So the highest, I would say, diaspora living abroad, coming, from the so-called Moroccan state, are basically Rifians. So we have around, the numbers vary between 4 to 6 million that live in Europe, outside the homeland. And this is for a reason, because after '56, when mass rape, mass prosecution happened, people only left to leave their country.
Sister Judd, I want to clarify that point, and I'm going to go into that. But just before we unwrap that aspect, because we're going to basically deal with the monarchy in Morocco, which certainly has been opened up to a number of criticism. But just to clarify the point, I'm just curious to know, do you see yourself as do you see a contradiction between your faith and your identity? I'm not so sure. Whether you're Sunni Muslim or whether you're Christian or whatever the case is, but would you see a contradiction between your faith and your identity as part of the Rifain? And do you have a problem, or would you have a problem amongst other Moroccans? I'm talking about not just the government, but other Moroccans who view Rifain as differently, or possibly a kind of a foreign influence or something along that line. Do you have that contradiction, or is this is not basically a kind of a religiously mandated persecution by the government itself?
I mean, first of all, we have to unwrap the faith of Islam in this case. First of all, I don't think there is any contradiction between your identity and having whatever religion, right? I don't think that there is a contradiction in that, but, and here is the but, the Moroccan state today is actually using Islam for their political advantages. So the Moroccan king today, he is not only the king and the first man in the country, but he is also religiously calling himself the commander of the faithful, which is a term which goes back to the Caliphate of the prophets. So basically, he considers, and he is putting like his authority based on his heritage, which he claims to be a descendant of the prophet. So basically, Yes, there are
which is false, because which is false, Najat, because he is not a the present king is most certainly not a descendant of the prophet. So it's a kind of a false slogan that he is appropriating for himself.
He's using that narrative. He's using that.
I was of the view that Morocco was inherently secular, but we're gonna unpack that further. We have to go for a quick ad break, and we're gonna continue the discussion when we're back. We'll be back shortly.
Okay.
Welcome back to I Beg to Differ, and I'm your host Yusuf Ismail, and today we're discussing the ongoing plight and persecution of the Riffain people by the Moroccan government. And certainly we've asked for representatives from the Moroccan embassy to meet us, to have a discussion with us, and certain representatives of the Moroccan community. Unfortunately, they've turned down our request for this debate. And so I'm left with Sister Najat, who is joining us from Germany. And Najat, just before we went for the break, I was of the view that Morocco as it stands, in fact, is a constitutional monarchy. They may use certain religious slogans, but some years back we were hearing about so-called reforms that were introduced in the legislation, for example, pertaining to the Muslim family code. And so the perception that was essentially given was that basically this is a liberal state where people have rights, where there's equality, rights of women. But the perception and the indication you are giving me is that it's a complete opposite, that Morocco is in fact a monarchical dictatorship that rules with an iron fist.
So basically there was, like a reform in 1999. Well, not really a reform. I mean, the actual constitutional reform came in 2011 after the so-called Arabian Spring, which is funny enough because Morocco isn't Arabic at all to start with. But anyhow, like due to the revolts that happened in 2011, there was a constitutional, change.
The Arab Spring. We're talking about the Arab Spring, right? Was it the Arab Spring? So,
yes.
but Morocco was not directly impacted to a large regard by the Arab Spring.
Well, it was impacted, and actually also here again, the only people that had to pay a big price and a price ticket during the revolts in that year, in February, on February 20th, and actually we will be remembering this event the coming week. On the 20th of February, there have been like 5 people killed, tortured in the Rif, and then they have been put in a bank, and the bank was burned down by the regime to accuse them of crimes which they didn't do. Apparently, these killed people, they have been prosecuted and been taken to the police station and have been tortured there. This is being recorded by many people that have been witnessing this. But anyhow, so yes, after the February 20th, the monarchy reacted very quickly in trying to establish reforms. But actually, if you go back and all the NGO reports, whether it's Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Reporters Without Borders, Freedom House, all the reports showing actually a regress when it comes to human rights and freedom of speech in particular. So over the last years, Morocco is actually going back to the years of lead, which we have seen with the former king, Hassan II. And actually, this is what we have today. So today, every journalist that tries to speak up and investigate and basically just do their job are being prosecuted.
Why? I want to know.
NGOs are not allowed.
No, Najat, but let's zero in on to that.
Yeah.
let's zero in onto that. I want to basically establish, and because this is important, and I don't think our South African government is doing anything about it. What is the rationale? What's the reason? I understand, every conflict has possibly some background. What is the rationale in 2019 for the ongoing persecution, torture, incarceration, and abduction of the Rifein people? Is it because that they want an independent state, or is it because the state sees this particular group of people as a foreign influence in their own land? Although they're indigenous, what's the actual rationale that the state is citing for, that we basically can have, or for this ongoing torture and massacre and persecution that's going on?
I mean, it has different aspects, I would say. So if you ask the government, and if you look at the prosecutions that put through, they basically say, they fear for, state unity. They talk about foreign aided, revolts. But this is all nonsense, to be honest. The only thing that they fear, because the king is not only the political person number one and the religious person number one, but he is also the businessman number one. So what they fear is actually to lose to lose their power, and also by that to lose also like the economic power, because all what's happening is this country is being ruled by an elite of thieves that exploiting the country and the wealth of the country. So we have rich resources in the country, and the people are not seeing anything from it. They are basically not participating in the wealth, right? So there have been WikiLeaks, Swiss Leaks reports coming out where the king has been, denounced for having hidden accounts, in Switzerland, in Panama. And it's not only him, it's a whole elite basically exploiting the resources of the country. And what they fear is actually just for their pockets, because they know if the RIF gets their right, the rest of Morocco will also stand up and ask for their rights. And that's what they don't want, right? And
so it's a dictatorship. So Morocco is a monarchical dictatorship. Would I be correct?
Yes.
Where the king basically determines.
Right. Yes, absolutely right. It's a monarchy, but a dictatorship. And there was even I think there was an English article talking about the smartest dictatorship of the world, because they know how to sell themselves and present themselves towards the world as being modern, as being, as you said, giving certain rights, rights which are basically not harming them, but so they would talk about civil rights which not harming their political power, nor harm their economic power. So that these are the rights they would give, but nothing beyond that. I mean, anything that's considered to be freedom in the Western world, which is like freedom of speech, human rights, and so on, none of it is being given to the people.
I'm just curious to know, if you look at your constitution, the Moroccan constitution, I don't know, probably as an attorney and probably from a legal perspective, the Moroccan constitution in principle purportedly guarantees, as I've seen here, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, although it is viewed as a sovereign state. But the constitution, in fact, the Moroccan constitution apparently cites international conventions and insists on respect for the universal principles of human rights. Now, from a legal angle, could this not be taken up in the courts from a legal angle, basically that some of the provisions are in fact unconstitutional?
Yes, I mean, it's there. I mean,
have you not taken that up? Have you not taken that up? Have the Rifein people not gone the legal route in terms of wanting to establish their rights?
I mean, look, the legal route, like if you look at what happened with the Iraq RIF, which is like the movement, the social movement that started in 2016 after like the death of a fish salesman who has been crushed in a garbage truck. So you see there people have taken to the streets exactly by, going that route of constitutional rights. And what happened after that is basically all the people that have been going that route have been persecuted. So some of the leaders, they even have been condemned to 20 years of prison, right? And one of the leaders, Nasser Zersafi, for example, that is one thing. We even, like some great people here in Europe, they lobbied and they even got him to be a finalist for the Sakharov Prize, right? So the Rifians try to go the legal road, but it doesn't help them.
Okay. I'll have to just
the reaction and the response of the Moroccan regime is the same. I'll have to in this country. And this actually leads to some of the people, say, okay, we see that there is no way we can live with this regime. And there is no way that we can establish our rights with this regime. So we have maybe to become political, not only asking for social for social things or demanding our rights, but maybe we should finally even talk about, we want autonomy, because there is no way we ever can get any rights from this particular state.
Okay,
regime.
Sister Najat, we're just going to have to go for an ad break. We are running short on time, and we're going to be back shortly. Welcome back to our Beg to Differ, and if you just joined us, we are discussing the ongoing persecution of the Rifain people in Morocco. Sister Najat, just curious to know, are you presently in exile in Germany?
Well, I wouldn't say, look, I'm living here and I'm in exile to some extent, yes. And I to be honest with you, and I fear to go back to Morocco.
What will happen if you go back? If you were to do this interview, in Morocco, or if the Moroccan government were to see this interview, what would happen to you?
I mean, to be honest with you, I'm quite sure that I'm on a watch list already, because I've been an activist and have been writing a lot about this topic, and also raising my voice, because this is, I'm European here, of Rif descendants. So I commit 100% to all the European values of freedom of thought, freedom of speech, all the humanistic values. So, and if I see injustice, I always speak up, no matter what fault it relates to. So, and if you ask me, yes, I'm afraid, for example, to go to Morocco or to go to the Rif, in fear to be persecuted. We have seen other Rif activists, with Belgian nationality, have been persecuted. They wanted to enter, or this person wanted to enter the Moroccan border, and then from there, right there, he has been persecuted, and he was condemned to 8 months in prison just for his Facebook activism.
One of your colleagues who in fact introduced me initially to you, hasn't obviously mentioned his name, but he did in fact express initial fear, and he's based in Morocco, that were there any kind of direct communication with me, or in terms of exposing the cause of the Rif, he would possibly be arrested and he would possibly be disappeared.
Let me give you an example from yesterday. So we have these thugs which called Paltajiyen, right? So basically what happens in Morocco, if you take to the street, as you said, legally, and you want to demand your rights, normally the regime always have paid thugs that will mix up and start damaging and doing things so they can prosecute the others. And these things happening even here in Europe. We have people being paid to harass women, men, to even, threaten them with killings and, bad things. And just yesterday, there was in France, in Paris, there was a conference to happen about freedom of speech and human rights in Morocco, and exiled journalists have been invited, and this event was organized by an NGO, right, in France, in Paris. And actually, out of sudden, facts came in. They have been, threatening the people, using bad language, cutting off the power, just to sabotage that event. So anything which exposes the reality and unmasks this ugly face of Morocco, is a threat to them, and they're using really, really bad things. I mean, even myself, I've been called bad names. I've been harassed, and yes, and I'm fearing. I have family there. I have my land there, and I'm fearing to go back because God knows what could happen to me. I mean, they could even take me to jail. Not even because of my activism, but maybe give me something else instead. Maybe they would say, okay, I have been, prostituting myself, or I have been, I had like drugs with me. So this is actually how they get rid of the people. So they just invent things, and we have seen also, like with the people that have been prosecuted in court, that they have been tortured and have been asked, or they have been tortured, they have been raped. And then basically make these people sign, papers, so they could be prosecuted. Right? We have seen people coming up and saying, "Hey, we have people who can witness," and the judges won't allow them to speak up. So there is a lot of recorded things, even on the legal way, where you can't trust the regime because they do whatever they think and they want.
Can you give us an example? Can you give us an example of, for example, that you are aware of some of the degrees of the level of torture that people sustain, or possibly death in custody, as a result of their arrest and subsequent prosecution? Can you give us an example so people of South Africa can know?
Yes, one of the famous cases, and they are all recorded, was Nasser Zafzafi, one of the protest leaders, who was in court saying, "I was raped. Someone put a stick into my, back part. I was tortured." Even pictures of him were circulating in the internet with marks of torture, right? And no one was persecuted. There was no investigation. Just lately, I think like 2-3 weeks ago, he experienced numbness, and he was like, calling for help. And then basically, he's still asking for his medical record that hasn't been provided to him. So many of the prisoners today that have been prosecuted, they're sending out messages from the prison reporting about the tortures and the abuse they have been suffering from. So we have people in other prisons sitting there, or like young people, young men, minors, even minors, that that's reporting the bad treatment they are experiencing, from harassment to racism. They are being they are being even abused and tortured. So we have all these letters coming through.
You gave the example, I think you gave the example, I'm not so sure if I misheard it or misunderstood, of someone apparently crushed by a garbage truck?
Yes. So basically,
what happened there? Tell us about that.
The most recent uprising in the Rif. Right, we have a history of revolts and uprisings in the Rif, but the most recent uprising, which is called Hirak Rif, happened in 2016, in October 2016, when a young man, a fishmonger, a fish salesman, basically has been stopped by police, and his fish was confiscated. And there are witnesses saying that the police asked for they basically asked for money, and when he didn't want to, give them the money, so they took the fish and dumped it in a garbage truck. And actually, to save his fish, he jumped into that garbage truck, and the policeman actually gave the order to kill him. He just said, tanmo, which means like grain him.
So he was grained. So he was basically crushed in the garbage truck.
Yes, so he was grained in the garbage truck, and that
was anyone prosecuted for that? Were the police prosecuted for that?
Felt like this feeling of of mistreatment, of not having any dignity in this country, not having any rights. So the whole people took to the streets to say, enough is enough. Enough is enough. We need to get our dignity back, and we need real reforms in this region to be able to live in dignity and to make a living in dignity and to get our rights, right? So, and they had like a list of demands, just like in 58 and 56, where also people took to the streets and revolted, and also put like a list of demands towards the regime, for better life. But I mean, you see, again, the response is the same over and over again. The response is, is repression, torture, mass persecution, and so I'm really like, it's like, what is the solution here? What could be a solution here? What is the solution?
Is the persecution of I mean, with many of these instances, you have politicians, rulers, leaders claiming a total ignorance, but there is something in law called command responsibility, where the chain of command comes from the very highest level. Is a Moroccan king fully aware of what is going on and turning a blind eye, or is it a situation of people under him that are engaging in these atrocities?
He knows exactly what's going on. I mean, even
has he been approached? Have the Riffain people approached him? Have the Riffain people approached him directly? Had an audience with him?
Look, the king has his yearly speech of throne in July, and actually, he was praising after people have been killed on July in 2017. After people have been killed, and we had like mass prosecution there, and all the protest leaders have been, put into jail, and even minors as young as 6 years have been put into jail, which is nonsense. It's craziness. He came and he spoke to the folk, and actually he was praising actually all his police for what they have been doing in the Rif. So you can't tell me he isn't aware. Of course he is aware. I mean, he came there lately, and just to see, and everyone was waiting for him to make a sign, to give it to the people a sign, and maybe just, and actually I don't think like anyone is demanding from the king that the prosecuted activists should be pardoned, because there is nothing to be pardoned for. They are not criminals. They are not criminals. They should be just get out of the jail, because they wanted goodness for the country. They wanted goodness for themselves. But we don't see that. We instead see ongoing image campaigns going on. I mean, he had pardoned, I have to say, he had pardoned around 180 people, more or less. But these have been people that already, passed their prison terms, or only had 2-3 months to go. So none of them also, really has been prosecuted for long terms, right? So yeah, he is doing these little things, but actually only to give a signal to the Europeans, so he will continue getting his money. And we don't see any improvement on the ground. We don't see work being established, jobs being created, infrastructure happening. Instead, we see that the borders are open, and he lets all the Rifians go, jump into the sea and leave for Europe again. So he's exporting his problem to Europe again. That's what we see. But he knows everything that's going on.
Okay, Sister
yes,
Najat, we have to go for an ad break.
Reaching out to him, even politicians that are part of the government.
We're going to continue the conversation. Sister Najat, we will continue the conversation. We just have to go for a quick ad break, and we'll be back for the final segment of I Beg to Differ. Welcome back to I Beg to Differ, and if you just joined us today, we're discussing the tragic and plight of the Rifane people, the ongoing persecution further north in Africa, in particular in Morocco. And with me, joining me via Skype from Germany, is Sister Najat. Sister Najat, just before we went for the ad break, we've spoken a lot about the king, and certainly the fact that there's a full awareness on his part of the persecution of the Rifane people. But within Moroccan society, there are a number of minorities. You've got Shiites, for example, you've got Christian groups, you've got different groups in general. And I'm told basically that the official religion in Morocco, surprisingly, is Islam, certainly because of the majority, and Judaism. So there are a large number of Jewish people, Jewish individuals that are significant members of the Moroccan administration, leading members in Moroccan society, in Moroccan industry, who have a higher status than the Rifane people.
Yes. First of all, the Jewish people, the Moroccan Jewish people, are part of our heritage, of our country, and but I think it's not. I think anyone who has a higher exposure within the elite of the regime is being taken well off, right? And yes, there are minorities that suffer too in Morocco, as you just mentioned, like the Christians, like Moroccan Christians, those, or even atheists who just declare they are non-believers, right? As well as Shia Muslims, as you said, right? Even though it's funny because, if you go back to even the Alawi, narrative of their origin, it would be all Shia. But yes, you are right, there are other minorities that are suffering too. There are even other marginalized areas like Zagora or like Jarada, where we had also like some uprisings, who also like seen prosecutions, but not to the extent we have seen it in the Rif. The Rifians have been prosecuted to 20 years. 20 years. None of the journalists, foreign journalists, is allowed to go into the Rif to even talk to the people there. So none of the NGOs is allowed.
Sorry, are you saying
NGOs is allowed to go to the Rif?
Are you saying journalists?
To record?
Are you saying journalists cannot? Are you saying journalists and ordinary members of the public cannot go to the Rif region? Are you not? Are you totally?
Yes, there are recorded journalists, international journalists that have been expelled. They are not. Yes, they are not allowed. Just like international NGOs are not allowed. Even like a high representative of the United Nations who recently came to Morocco. Even though the Rif was on her list, she wasn't allowed. At the end, she wasn't. It wasn't on her agenda anymore. And then the other status, which is very, very important, which was also like one of the key demands of the Hirak movement, the Rif, unlike other regions in Morocco, even as I said, there are regions that are also marginalized, but the Rif is still a military zone. There was a decree in '58 that declared the Rif, or like parts of the Rif, a military zone, and it's still there. The decree is still there, and we have around 40,000 army forces deployed in the Rif today.
I just saw in Norway just a few weeks ago, on 28th of January 2019, in the city of Oslo, basically there was a declaration basically that was made, RIF's message to South Africans. And fellows, what would you like, I mean, have you approached other governments? What would you like the South African government to do?
I mean, we turn to the South African government to ask actually for their support, for their support.
Has there been a response?
Case, especially as the South Africans know what it means to be under an apartheid system, to live racism, and we know all about their struggle and their fight for freedom. And we ask the South African people and government to support the Riffians and the RIF case for us to also become a great people of freedom like you guys have established and achieved in South Africa, right? So for us, Nelson Mandela and what the South Africans have overcome is a role model to us, even though we have been there before and we tried to establish it even in 1921, but we couldn't for many reasons, and especially due to war crimes that have been put against us. But we would love to have the support, for us as a minority to be protected by a great nation, by a great nation such as South Africa.
What would the solution be to your plight? The solution, would it be the establishment of the RIF Republic? Would that be the solution?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that is something. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You clear. I can hear you.
Yes. Well, this is up to the Riffian people to decide what they want, I would say, right? But the solution, first of all, is for now to let all the political prisoners come out, right? That is the very first thing. But I think since the Moroccan regime hasn't shown any interest in finding a solution, yes, there are people who think that maybe a RIF Republic is the only solution, to finally become, independent and have the dignity and establish, progress. But, I think this is up to the Riffian people to decide what they want. What is it that the Riffian want, right? What is it? And
how many political prisoners?
All of them, they want this repression and racism. They all want this to end. This is the very first thing. And then, yes, there are people who think this is the only solution, but this is up to the Riffians to decide what the Riffians want.
Thank you. Just last, and we're going to wrap up now. The average individual on the street via social media, because prior to me, and I may forgive my ignorance, but not a lot of people know about the Riffian or the Riffian cause. I mean, a lot of people know about the Palestinians, what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Afghanistan. Very few people know about your particular group and community. If there's one message that you could give out to the people of South Africa, the ordinary people out there in the world, what would it be in terms of furthering your cause and finding a solution in ending the persecution by the Moroccan government?
I mean, the very first thing which I want everyone to know is actually to get raise their awareness of what the Riffians are and what the sufferings we have been through, and get their support and sympathy for us to finally be free and get back our dignity, just to be free people like all the other great nations that we see. That's what we want. We want your sympathy and your support, and also like your awareness for the RIF case, for the Riffian people that have been suffering for almost a century now. Almost a century.
Sister Najat, I want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate your time and your enthusiasm in furthering the cause of the Riffian people, and certainly we will be having further engagements over the next couple of months and possibly furthering your cause to other people. Well, that's all we have for this evening. If you've been watching for the past hour, we were discussing the ongoing persecution and tragic plight of the Riffian people in Morocco. But join us next week for more hard-hitting interactive debate on I Beg to Differ. Till then, this is Yusuf Ismail, phone on behalf of ITV. Good evening and Assalamu alaikum.